Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman here, as always, with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Tony, as always, I am here to hold you accountable. In this case, it is for a particularly disturbing piece of headline punnery that you released on Tuesday. The headline, and I quote, "Today's Jack Sawyer, mean pride," close quote. Tony, was that truly necessary to write about the Ohio State defensive end?
Incredibly necessary, Tom. I will take issue with your personal attack of punnery. This is not a pun. This is just a play on words, or perhaps a play on a lyric, completely different than a pun. I will ask for your apology. You don't have to give it now. We can save it for the end of the show when more people have tuned in and they can appreciate your hurtful words and incorrect words. But yes, thank you, Tom. Thank you for those kind words of my tremendous headline. It is always appreciated and rarely given because we know you are reticent to praise others. You are the kind of person that likes to be praised. And so any type of praise, even faint and damning, I will take, Tom. Not because I need it, but because it's just good to see you kind of humble yourself to the greatness of others. Thank you.
I am deeply annoyed to have Googled that a pun and a play on words are not technically the same thing. There is technically a difference, and you have brought great irritation to my life now for the second time today, Tony. Well done.
Well, this show has been a success. We're going to thank you all for tuning in. We're going to end it right there. This should have been the 1,000th show. It would have been perfect. But we will progress on. Tom, we have seen a full week's worth of practice, meaning about 38 minutes of two practices. Of the first two spring practices, players are on spring break. I almost said strike. That's in a few years. They are on spring break right now, along with the rest of the university. So I thought we would go over in today's show and on Thursday's show the two deep on offense today, two deep on defense for the next show, and just give the listeners and viewers an idea of the way things are shaking out right now. Now, Tom, is it true that in the first two practices we see everything and we know everything?
I wouldn't say that's technically true in the strictest sense of the word, by which I mean no, it is not true. It is true that we see the order in which guys are kind of going through drills, which is generally a pretty decent ballpark for what order guys are in the depth chart. But as we've said before, the first week is really good for having something to compare it to when 2 weeks from now we have more meaningful information. So, this is probably not the final version. You do a post on the Huddle board presented by Jeff Ruby Steakhouse at BuckeyeHuddle.com every year, talking about, following through a depth chart, and it's like version 1.0, version 1.1, going all the way through. I don't remember how many versions you got through last year, but, the depth chart from January 10th or whatever was not all that similar to the depth chart for, August 30th. So we're only a small portion of the percentage, a small portion of that way through that process.
Yeah, right now I will be going off of version 4.2. It was 4.1, and then Ohio State landed a commitment from a 2024 punter. So we've already thrown him in there, and Nick McClarty is the reason for 4.2. But let's start off on offense. Let's start out at quarterback. What we have seen to this point, Devin Brown repping first, Will Howard repping second. I have this as an or just because they're taking the same number of reps. So right now that's the way I view it. We've thrown plenty of highlights up on YouTube. You can check that out at youtube.com/BuckeyeHuddle, or actually just go to BuckeyeHuddle.com, and we've got the video there for you from the first 2 days of practices, the quarterbacks. And I don't think there's anything we've seen to this point that would have us leaning one way, or it has me leaning one way or the other. Maybe you are different. I do wonder at some point if Devin Brown is not going first. He's going first in all of these drills that we've seen. Again, we get kicked out at period 7, which is when 7-on-7 kicks in. But I'm not surprised Devin Brown is going first just because he knows everything. I have you seen anything to this point to think that anybody has moved forward yet?
No, I think we are still very much in default mode right now, which is the default mode is the guy who's returning. If there's anything that's even remotely close, the guy who is returning is going first. We'll get to that at the running back position. We'll get to that at several other positions where they've brought in a transfer, center, for example. The guy who has been at Ohio State for a year, multiple years, is the guy who is going first. I don't read anything into it beyond that. So yeah, I think this is a Will Howard or Devin Brown. I think if you really wanted to be, technically, I think you probably have Lincoln Kienholz in here as an or as well. Although it feels to me like there's kind of the top two, and then there's Lincoln Kienholz, and then there's the 2 freshmen below him. If you wanted to put him on here as an or, I think technically if Ohio State was going to put out a depth chart, which, if they wanted to do that, hey, that's a thing they could do. But if they were going to put out a depth chart, I think they're going to tell you that, hey, these 3 guys are all really competing for the starting job right now. But I think realistically it's more Will Howard or Devin Brown, like you said.
Yeah, because what I've seen from those two is basically say they're all 5 doing a drill. They'll run through it 3 times. Each guy will get 3 throws, and then they'll run through it again. But sometimes the 2 freshmen will get skipped by Will Howard or Devin Brown. I haven't seen Lincoln Kienholz jump the line like those two. So like if you're going to break it down into terms of percentages, it's 30-30 for Will Howard and Devin Brown, maybe like 25 for Lincoln Kienholz, and then the other 15% for the other 2 at times. But it's even more. They're getting more than that, the freshmen, but they do get jumped, and I just haven't seen Lincoln Kienholz jump them yet to have him jump up into the 2 older guys. But he could certainly play his way in there, and he is running third behind them, but he is at the outset getting the same number of reps. So I think OSU would just definitely throw an or in there. Running back, Tom, do you know how many games TreVeyon Henderson has not started at Ohio State when he has been healthy?
How many games TreVeyon Henderson has not started at Ohio State when he's been healthy? I'm going to say, is the answer 0?
The answer is 2, the first 2 games of his career. So we see, I have Quinshon Judkins as an or because he's coming from a place that he started for a year and a half, and he's coming here to play. And I don't get hung up on the depth chart here because they're just going to share the load. But I do believe TreVeyon Henderson will be starting until he's, has to miss a game or whatever, or is given a week off. I do think there's going to be some of that as well, probably for both guys. Like, hey, we don't need you this week against whomever. Go ahead and take the week off. Get Dallin Hayden some carries. But I have an or here. Would you like to disagree?
I don't disagree. I think this is very much a 1A, 1B situation. And this is probably something that's fairly similar to the quarterbacks, where the reality is you probably have your 2 guys who are sort of at the top and are a very legitimate, 1A, 1B kind of battling for the starting job, whatever that looks like. And then you have Dallin Hayden, who's kind of playing the role of Lincoln Kienholz, where he's probably, technically in the battle for the starting job, but probably not going to win it. But he's still ahead of the 2 freshmen who are below him, James Peoples and Sam Williams-Dixon. So I think the top 5 at the running back position are probably spaced pretty similarly to how the top 5 at the quarterback position are, where it's kind of like 2 and then the 1 guy in the middle and then the 2 freshmen.
Yeah, I would agree with that completely. So we move to receiver, where I have said that it all hinges on where Emeka Egbuka is lining up, because he can play any of the 3 positions. If he's in a slot, that moves things around. That puts Brandon Inniss on the bench. If he's at X, that puts Brandon Inniss in the game. Where's Jeremiah Smith? Listening to and watching Emeka Egbuka last week or so, talking maybe the week before, whatever it was, with reporters, he mentioned because I asked him, where are you going to be playing? He said, I'm going to be bouncing around. He mentioned playing X this spring because their shorter throws gives him more opportunity for run after catch. Said he gives him an advantage over smaller corners as opposed to playing in the slot against safeties and linebackers. So to me, that sounds like he's going to be starting out and spending more time outside, which then to me puts Brandon Inniss in that first group in the slot. And if Emeka Egbuka is outside, the other outside receiver is Carnell Tate. Now, whether Z and Emeka Egbuka is at X and Brandon Inniss is in the slot, Carnell Tate can play wherever. This to me seems like a solid 3, and then Jeremiah Smith just comes in either at X or Z, and then the other guy at X or Z moves around. To me, it feels like a solid 4. Brian Hartline wants to get to 5 or 6. Jaden Ballard's been around forever. Can he get into that group? Bryson Rogers, Keon Grays, Kojo Antwi, these other guys that have not quite done it. Can they get into there? But I think to me, it's a solid 4 right now. I don't know. Jaden Ballard would be the 5th. Can he make it a 5? And I've tried to be cautious about Jeremiah Smith. Nobody else is going to be cautious about him, and that includes his teammates and his coaches. So, I'm not going to die on this hill, frankly.
No, I think there's a few different things to address here. One is, I think trying to put a specific position label on any of these guys at this point is an absolute fool's errand, because they're going to be moving guys around. And even if you're labeled as the X, you're going to be in the slot sometimes. We saw that with Marvin Harrison. Marvin Harrison was definitely not the H last year, and you saw him in the slot a whole bunch. And so I think trying to put any kind of specific labels on any of these guys right now is just, it's even more of a pointless exercise, Tony, than putting together a 2 deep on March 12th. But either way, I agree with you on Carnell Tate, Jeremiah Smith, Emeka Egbuka. I think those are 3 of your top 4 that you're feeling pretty good about right now. When I went back and listened to Denzel Burke talking about the wide receivers, he mentioned Jaden Ballard's name. He slipped JB into the middle of a list of the other 3 guys, and I just missed it live. But he did have Jaden Ballard in there when he was talking about those guys, and we have talked before about Denzel Burke generally is not just going to be a sunshine pumper. So if he's talking about Jaden Ballard, all right, I will entertain Jaden Ballard being part of that top 4, and I think Brandon Inniss is probably close to or in that group as well. So maybe that's a top 5, and then after that, it's a little bit of okay, who's your 6th? Will they find a 6th who they feel is kind of at that level, whether it's Bryson Rogers or Kojo Antwi or Keon Grays, whoever it might be. But I am with you in terms of, you've got that top group. I think Jeremiah Smith is already pretty comfortably in that top group. We'll see where Mylan Graham is when he gets to campus over the summer. But I think, every time you talk to someone about Jeremiah Smith, you get told the same basic thing. And I'm not ready to say going to be a day 1 starter, but I think I'm at the point where I'm going to say going to be a day 1 contributor at least some kind of level. Don't you think?
I would say day 1 starter if Emeka is in the slot. I would say day 1 contributor because if we want to be really, tied down to starter, non-starter, as opposed to it, these 3 guys got the same amount of reps, and they're all a little fewer number of reps than Emeka Egbuka. But officially starting, I think that depends on where Emeka is. And the Denzel Burke thing kind of annoys me because I went back and listened and watched, and he says Mecca, Carnell, JD, JJ. So it's like, did you mean JJ when you said JD, or did you mean JB when you said JD? Because so that kind of hung me up in terms of, is he talking about Jaden Ballard? I don't know. You would hope so, I guess, if you're a Buckeye fan or you're a member of the Ballard family. If Denzel Burke is talking about you, then that is always a good thing, especially unprompted in terms of, hey, how's Jaden Ballard doing?
Right. Well, that's JD would be Jaden, or did he say JB and it was Jaden Ballard. Either way, I went back and listening to it. I thought, okay, he did mean Jaden Ballard there, but obviously I'm listening to this after the interview's over, so I didn't get a chance to follow up with him. But whether it's Carnell Tate or Carnell Tate, Jeremiah Smith, Emeka Ibuka, you want to say Brandon Innes, you want to say Jaden Ballard. I think that group is probably Tate, Smith, Ibuka, probably is going to be your top three, probably. But you've got other guys in that mix, and how are they going to sort those guys? Like you said, a lot of it centers around where does Ibuka play, and the answer is not going to be, oh, he's in the slot, and he's in the slot 100% of the time, or he's outside, and he's outside of the time, 100% of the time. Who are your three starters is going to depend on where he is, probably, and where he is might depend on who your best three is. And then as you shuffle guys around to get guys, a little bit of time off, or hey, someone's out this week or whatever, that may change where he is as well.
I will say the last thing about the receivers. This was Emeka Ibuka talking about Brandon Innes. Brandon doesn't get enough praise. He's just as mature as anybody I've ever seen. How he handles his business. He's super competitive too. I'm super excited for Brandon's future. He's wise beyond his years. He's learned the offense, lightning quick. He's very talented, pass catcher, run after the catch, big play. There's nothing he can't do, Tom. And yes, he did say there's nothing he can't do, Tom. Just to really be emphatic on that. Jaden Ballard had a pretty good spring last year because I was doing some digging a couple weeks ago. I was like, oh, reading back of what I wrote. So I must have been real. So I wouldn't be surprised if he has another good spring this year. So that's receivers. And like Tom said, don't get hung up on who's where. These are all pigeonholes that can hold any kind of pigeon, I guess, if you would, if that's an acceptable analogy. Tight ends are interesting to me. I've got G. Scott or Will Kazmarek here. I think my initial one had G. Scott or Will Kazmarek or Jelani Thurman. After watching a couple of practices, I've removed an Orr. Don't worry, it could come back at any time. I did not see a ton of the tight ends on the first day. And I know some people said Will Kazmarek was running with the ones. Everybody's going to run with everybody at some point. And so on day two, I made sure to check out the tight ends, and Will Kazmarek was running with the fours. So I don't think he's the fourth tight end. That just gives you an idea of the movement that these guys have. But I've got a G. Scott or Will Kazmarek. I will say, Tom, I have been told that the defensive coaches love Will Kazmarek and his physicality. So let that be some sort of hint as to where things go. It may just depend on depth in terms of game plan, in terms of who starts, but I think both of these guys are going to play a ton.
Well, I mean, they do generally play some 12 personnel over the course of a game. So then you'd have two tight ends on the field who would be, if you start in 12 personnel, Tony, then you have two starting tight ends. That's how it works. I think both of these guys are going to very clearly have a role of some kind. Jelani Thurman, I think, is just sort of a work in progress, and we'll see how he moves up the depth chart. He was, I think, at one point when I looked, behind Bennett Christian. I don't know that I think that that's where that's going to end up, but as you said, you look at, you look at one drill, and there's 8 other stations going on, so you're looking all over the field, and if you happen to look at the one where Jelani Thurman's running fourth, it's like, oh boy, he still has a ways to go. And then you look over and then he's running second. And then it's like, oh boy, look at him. He's pushing for the starting job. And you don't have time to sit there and just watch the tight ends and really pay attention to that stuff. That's again where, what we see in 3 weeks, 2 weeks is going to have a lot more impact on, exactly where we think these things are standing at that point. Right now, it's too early to really read too much into it, but G. Scott or Will Kazmarek, if you said, of all the tight ends, who's going to be the starter? If you give me G. Scott and Will Kazmarek, who's going to be the starting tight end on day one, I think I will say yes, and I will give you the field and like my chances at that point.
Yeah, and in terms of running with the ones, we saw Jelani Thurman last spring running with the ones at times. Like, guys just move in and move through there, so that will continue to happen. Moving to the offensive line right now, left tackle is still Josh Simmons. I have seen Zen Maholsky and George Fitzpatrick both getting some time there. But, Tom, really, left tackle is completely set, and whoever is behind him will just be whoever that that next guy is. And you hope that you hope that you don't have to rely on that guy. But they do need to find a backup. And really, that's the only battle at left tackle right now.
Right. Josh Simmons came in, was the starter at left tackle pretty much immediately, never gave it up. Seemed like he was maybe the most improved lineman on the team over the course of the season last year. And yeah, I mean, unless Caden Proctor goes back in the transfer portal or something like that, I would expect Josh Simmons to be the starter at left tackle. And then the question is just who's behind him. And, frankly, even if he gets hurt, I don't know that the second string left tackle, doing the air quotes thing there, if the second string left tackle really is the guy who comes in, or if, you kick Josh Fryer, for example, over from right tackle over to left tackle because you think Tigger Shabola is your third best tackle. And so you're going to play those guys that way. This is all stuff that's going to be determined over the course of the spring and the summer. But, I think the depth chart you have there is broadly correct. Simmons 1, and then either Mahalski or Fitzpatrick behind him.
But I do agree with you. The number 2 left tackle is probably Josh Fryer. And then unless they like Tigger Shabola, but if they liked him so much, he'd be the number 1 right tackle. So I think that's how that would work. Left guard, Donovan Jackson back for his senior year. Obviously, that's where he is. I think it's a good sign that I saw Austin Searveld, the redshirt freshman, as the number 2 left guard in the 2 practices, the 2 times I paid attention to it. So I think it's good that you've got a young guy making a push and not pushing Donovan Jackson. But if you can get a second-year guy just into the 2 deep, I think that's a positive thing. It can also mean you've got no depth there. Like Carson Hinsman was sort of the center by default last year, but it's better to be a backup by default rather than a starter by default. So I think they're still okay here. Austin Searveld, I think, has a bright future, but there's really no discussion here. And again, this might be whoever is the third guard is also the backup here.
Yeah, that might be the case. But yeah, I mean, in terms of starter, this is another clear-cut starter. Donovan Jackson, very obviously, is going to be the starter at left guard. The only time that there's been any question in the last couple of years about Donovan Jackson being the starter at left guard is when we were, wondering entering spring last year whether he was going to get moved out to left tackle. The answer then was no. The answer now is no. He's the starter. Searveld seems pretty comfortably entrenched at that backup spot. The real only question here is how comfortable would they be if they had to play Searveld at left guard? I don't know. I don't know if he's, officially in the circle of trust yet, but he's a second-year guy. There's a lot of time to go through spring ball and summer and fall camp and all that kind of stuff for him to get to that point. This is still very early in a guy's career for him to be playing at this level. So I think, this is I think a good sign for his long-term potential there. And, if he is a solid backup there all year this year, then he obviously becomes by far and away the front runner to replace Jackson when he leaves after this season.
And this would be another one where, is Enoch Vamahi the third guard? Can Austin Searveld be the third guard? If a redshirt freshman can hold off a 6th-year senior, I think that would be a pretty good move. Moving to center, I have Carson Hinsman or Seth McLaughlin. Now, we've seen Hinsman with the ones each time. And to give you an idea that maybe you don't get too worked up about who you see where, I saw Joshua Padilla with the 2s on Thursday, and obviously Hinsman still with the 1s. So McLaughlin with the 3s or whatever, like he's not going to be with the 3s. He's battling for the starting spot. So I have that as an or. They've raved about Carson Hinsman's offseason, which I think is going to make for a fantastic competition. But I'm not taking the or off of this one yet, Tom.
No, I think this is one where it's way too early to make any kind of judgment here. My expectation is that Seth McLaughlin is starting somewhere this fall, and maybe that center, maybe he's someone who gets slid over to guard. That's a possibility. Or Carson Hinsman gets slid over to guard if McLaughlin wins the center position. Either way, I think you're not bringing in a veteran transfer from Alabama to not start for you. That's I would be pretty surprised if he was not the guy somewhere. And I don't read anything, as you said, I don't read anything into Josh Padilla being ahead of him for whatever the drill was last Thursday. That's kind of a, it's week 1 of spring ball. Frankly, if you are of the mind that Will Howard is going to be your starting quarterback this fall, and Will Howard is repping second, and you're of the mind that Seth McLaughlin, who is a fellow transfer, is also maybe the front runner to be the center, then, when you're running all these drills and you're snapping to the quarterback, Seth McLaughlin is snapping to Will Howard. And yes, they're both technically snapping second, working second, but they're working together. So, those are reps of those two guys working together. This is very likely reading way too much into, way too little from week 1 of spring ball. But, I don't read anything into, Carson Hintzman is with the ones right now. That definitely means he's in front. I think it means, the guys who are transfers are not repping first because they're the ones who are the transfers, and you have returning players going first.
Not everybody is Caleb Downs. Let's just say that. But yeah, so right guard, Luke Montgomery, I think has been, it's a very good sign that he is there. He's been repping first ahead of Enoch Famahi. We were wondering what would happen with Luke Montgomery as right tackle or right guard. What would happen with Josh Fryer? Ryan Day talked about before spring ball started that they were going to give Fryer a look at right guard. Then once we talked to him after the first practice, it doesn't sound like there's going to be, they might be doing much of that, if any of that, in terms of Fryer at right guard, because they really want to get a long look at Luke Montgomery here. And I think that is a good thing. I think they know what they have in Fryer. The ultimate competition may be in the fall when it is Luke Montgomery versus Hintzman or McLaughlin for that right guard spot or something like that. Or if they go into the portal for a right tackle, now you've got a pretty interesting battle at right guard between Fryer, Montgomery, and Hintzman or McLaughlin. Like, if you really want to bolster your depth, you'll go into the portal after spring. We've got time to talk about that. But Luke Montgomery, Enoch Famahi, no Orr here. This is a situation where if Luke Montgomery is even, he's leaving in terms of this competition with Enoch Famahi. And from what I've seen, now I did see Montgomery running with the twos at times on Thursday, but also I think Donovan Jackson was as well. So make of that what you will, Tom.
Done. I have made with it what I will, and it is what is known in the business as an air biscuit. No, not I don't think there's any firm conclusions to be drawn from that, other than you probably shouldn't be drawing any firm conclusions from that. I think the fact that Montgomery is repping first at right guard tells you they want, as you said, a very, very serious look at him. I think they think he could be a potential solution there. And all the stuff I said about Austin Sierveld, and if you're in this position to be a backup at this point in your career, as your second spring at Ohio State as an offensive lineman, only a redshirt freshman, if you're in a position where they're looking at you as a starter, that is a very good sign for your that puts you on the Donovan Jackson career trajectory, or Paris Johnson was kind of on that, where you're getting reps much higher, much earlier than you would ever expect an offensive lineman to. That's a very good sign for Luke Montgomery. The interesting thing to me here is we have not, you talked about Josh Fryer a little bit at right tackle. Tigger Shabola is there as well, but I think there's a real possibility that, outside of center, there's a possibility that Tigger Shabola is your next man up. If he doesn't win a starting job, he might be your next man up at left tackle, left guard, and right tackle, or, at least 3 of those. We'll see how he does in terms of flip-flopping sides of the line. But he's someone who we've seen at guard before. We've seen him at tackle this spring. We know they like him. So, if he doesn't end up as the number 1 right tackle or number 1 right guard or whatever it is coming out of the spring, I think, whatever the depth chart says, if someone else goes down, I think he is probably, there's a decent chance he's the next guy in the game, wherever that might be.
Yeah, and we've got him as the number 2 right tackle behind Josh Fryer. And I think it was good to see him at tackle. You open up spring, you see him at tackle. That gives you an idea of how they feel about the mobility and his ability to move, because he's a bigger kid. And so they believe he can handle that. But I'm with you. It's kind of the kind of like Josh Fryer in terms of if there's an open spot, or Brandon Bowen from back in the day. His ability to play multiple spots, he's had that experience. I think it's just going to be a really interesting thing to see what happens after spring. And if there's somebody out there that they want as another tackle, and maybe there's a left tackle out there. I don't know that there is. Josh Simmons moves over. Josh Fryer. It could just be one really, really big competition there, and ultimately a right guard, which would be interesting. It'd be like it's the most talented position on the Ohio State offensive line because there's 4 starter quality people battling for it. But I do feel like this is not quite finished, but I think they'd be okay with Luke Montgomery winning it and holding on to that job. Tigger Shabola as the utility guy, I think that has promise as well. And again, these are young-ish guys. Shabola is in his 3rd year, so he's still got time. It would still be around for obviously a couple of years. And Montgomery, if you could get multiple years out of those guys as a core part of your lineup, I think you'll take that. And if Luke Montgomery wins this job, it's not by default in terms of the center job, as I mentioned with Carson Hinsman last year. Montgomery wins it, he's going to win against, it's not just going to be Enoch Fumahi that he's going to be battling with ultimately, because he's going to have to be one of the 5 best. And this is going to be a better 5 than they had last year. I know a lot of people are concerned about the offensive line. We've talked about it. It's going to be better than it was last year. It's already way better than it was last spring. And it's probably better than it was last fall. So I think they'll turn it on. They'll be okay. And I don't necessarily know that they're done yet on the offensive line. So, Tom, anything else before we get out of here?
Nope. Other than the fact that we're talking about all this stuff, and whatever degree of certainty you heard in our voice throughout the show, realistically, you should dial that back by about 15% or so, just because, we're laying out the offensive line and it all seems very logical. And I think this is exactly where things stand right now. And then if they land some fantastic left tackle in the portal following the spring, you can shuffle the left tackle over to the right tackle and the right tackle maybe over to the right guard. And does that impact who's playing? You could kind of shuffle the whole line around at that point. So yeah, this is very much a work in progress. As Tony said, version 4.2, rest assured there will be a version 4.3 and beyond, and it will not all look exactly the same. So, but definitely I think this is a good exercise just to sort of let you know where things stand right now, with the understanding this is not the final exam. This is what my kids call the sloppy copy.
It's just one notch above deciding who the starting quarterback is by their spring game performance, to give you an idea. But we did want to go ahead and share what we have seen, the way things are going right now, and you can take that information and do whatever you want with it. Throw down some wagers, obviously, of course, as everybody knows. Just go crazy with the information from the spring. But so that'll do it. Want to thank you all for tuning in. As always, go ahead, if you have not yet hit the like button on this video, if you're watching it, please do so. And if you have not subscribed yet, also do so. Please, hey, we are almost at 20,000 subscribers on YouTube. So if you're not yet subscribed, please do so. Help us get over that mark. It's like, come on, be cool. Also, you can find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. If you're not yet a member there, hey, let's hit the 20,000 subscriber mark there as well. Don't be stingy. Help a brother out. So thank you all for tuning in, and we'll talk to you guys later.